Welcome everybody. We're going to use the microphones just to aid, because the last time it was quite hard to hear at the back. Is this a good level for everybody? Yeah. Okay. You ready to go? Okay.
Yeah.
Huh?
You okay with that? Do you want it?
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah. Welcome everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm really delighted to be here. My name's Mark Corcoran. I am part of a kind of collective, loose group called Culture Club that started 8 years ago, next month. And its sole purpose was, and we've worked steadily for 8 years just for this moment. It was all the efforts over the years, all the newsletters, was to be here at 7:30 on the 8th of June 2023 to launch Ines Khai's first book, Child of the Sea. And I think that deserves a round of applause. I want to thank Tom. The last event we did here actually before COVID, so we haven't done too much since COVID, although we did some walking tours. But the last event before COVID was like a week before COVID, and it was here, and it was for International Women's Day, and Ines sang. And did you read? No, just sang. That was it. You read it?
I read, yeah.
Oh, did you read as well?
I read, but not something from me.
Yeah. So it's brilliant to be able to. Hopefully, we'll get back to doing these sort of things. So I wanted to thank Tom. It's so good to have an independent bookshop, and he's so supportive of everything that we do. And so thanks a million. But thanks to everyone for coming, because it's a bit lonely here without you giving up your evening. So I think we might start with a song. I think that's a good place to start. So I'll hand it over to Ines before we get into a very in-depth literary interview.
pour voler dans nuage aller. Derrière l'océan, pour voler dans nuage aller. Gardez tes yeux ouverts. Des mains moins vides, gardez. Mis des pieds moins à terre. Arrivé Jean de Lanmè, pour moi en qui gros, pour moi en qui gros, pour payer moi été Adam, l'aime pas jambé de l'eau, pour moi en qui gros, pour moi en qui gros, pour payer moi été Adam, l'aime-moi pas jambé de l'eau, l'aime-moi pas jambé de l'eau. Laisse-moi pas jamber de l'eau, poupée, moi arrêtez, attends, arrêtez,
I just want to take a moment to explain why I picked this song, this specific song to start. It's a song that's called Jambé de l'eau. It's in my native language, in Creole. It means to jump over the sea as a magical way to travel, to go to another place. It's a song about the sea that makes us being apart, but that's also a link between us and different places, different countries, different islands. And this song, I wrote it many moons ago. It's on my first album that was released in 2008. And I think it's the very first song that I wrote about the water, about the sea. And without even realizing it, I've been writing about the water for a very long time. So on this album, there was a couple of songs about it. On the following album, 4 years later, there was a song about it. And then on my last album, 3 years ago, the whole album was about the water, was about the sea. The album was called Pitit à Lanmè, and it means child of the sea. And that's where the book started.
Thank you. I think just before we even begin, to let everybody know that the book is obviously on sale, and we're not going to let anyone leave until they buy it, which I know is probably not very legal, but you know, you got to hustle here. Okay? What's the point? You know, what's the point of coming out?
Yep.
Also, we're just going to I'll ask a few questions, but if anyone else has questions at any stage, please jump in. And finally, the first ever culture club kind of night we had was with Ines, I think in 2015. So, yeah, in third place. And it was a whole evening kind of celebrating your culture. So I thought we'd start with maybe if you could tell us where you're from and a little bit about that place and your people and your culture.
So I'm from Guadeloupe. It's in the Caribbean. And it's a small island. I say small because I think when people think about the Caribbean, maybe they think about Cuba, about Jamaica, and these islands are way, way bigger than Guadeloupe. So it's actually it's an archipelago, to be more precise, and the biggest part is in the shape of a butterfly. It's in the French Caribbean, so the official language is French, but French is more like the language that you will speak if you want to go get your passport renewed, if you're going to school, to the university. if you're going to do anything official, but the language that we will talk with friends or family is Creole. And people used to say that Creole is some kind of broken French, but in the last years, in the last decades, I think now, linguists have started studying the language and how it works, the grammar and everything. And now we are understanding it better, and we see that the root of it comes from West Africa. And then with the way, well, there's always an explanation in history, so maybe we should start from there. So Guadeloupe, like many islands in the Caribbean, used to be, the people there were called the native, the indigenous people were the Carib and the Arawaks. Like the same family as the Native Americans. And when slavery started, and then people from Africa were taken to the Caribbean, they all came with their culture, with their languages. But it was part of the way it worked to mix them up, to make sure that they're not able to communicate between each other, so they cannot organize to rebel and try to break free. Because of that, they had to find a way to create a language, create something new with their own culture. And then, of course, with being submerged in the French language also, there are a couple of words here and there, but the real root of the language is from West Africa. So Guadeloupe is a very strange way on paper, because on paper everybody's French, everybody has a French passport. Technically it's Europe, but it's actually in the Caribbean. So most people would study like primary school, secondary school there, and then move to France or different places to go into to university. So I think it's part of the culture also to travel, to go to different places, and also being in the Caribbean, we're immersed in different cultures. Like the island of the left is English speaking, the island of the right is Spanish speaking, others speak Dutch and different. So many different cultures are there, and you can hear it in the language, you can hear it in the music, you can feel it in the stories, in everything.
So this is your first book, but primarily music has been your life really, and I was wondering about how that culture comes through in your music, and maybe those connections to West Africa. I mean, what are the things that we should listen out for that are very particular, or are the connections are they distant now, and it's very much its own thing over that period of time, and how that influences you and the music that you've done?
It's not that distant, because I think it's in the music, it's very present in the rhythm, in the drums. So each specific island has their own traditional music with their own traditional drum. And in Guadeloupe, the traditional drum is called the ka, and the traditional music is the goka. And we have 7 different rhythms, and each rhythm is very different, very specific. And what I like is that when I get to interact with African musicians, there is always a moment when something happens. When I arrived in Ireland years ago, I used to live in Cork, and I had a band called Pitit, and the guitarist of the band was from the Congo. And so when we first met, I gave him my album so he could listen and everything. And at some point he was listening to a song, And the rhythm, it was one of the traditional rhythm, one that is called Pajambel. And he was like, what is this rhythm? What is this? I told him that's traditional, it's Croca, it's Guadeloupean rhythm, it's called Pajambel. He was like, no, it's the rhythm in my village.
Wow.
I know it. So no, it's not distant. It's here. It's still here. It's still happening.
Wow. And so, after making some albums and songwriting, where did the idea to write, or even had you any aspiration to write sort of fiction or anything on that side before this project, and where did that all come from?
When I was a teenager, there was the library. I used to live in a small city in maybe half an hour away from Paris, and the library was on my way to the secondary school. And I used to stop there before on my way home, and one day, the thing is, at school in French, you only look at like classical writers, like Victor Hugo, these kind of things. And I remember one day I stopped at the library and I asked the librarian, do you know any Guadeloupean writers? And she told me, yes, there is Marie Scondé. You should try, you should get one of her books. So I took a book from Marie Scondé. It's called Ségou, and it's amazing. It's kind of like Racine from Alex Haley. You know, she goes like generations and generations and generations before, and all the way to the civilization of Ségou in Mali. That's really centuries ago. And that's when I started thinking, when I grow up, I want to be Marie Scondé. That's what I want to do. I don't want to be a writer. I want to be Marie Scondé. That's what I want to do. And I started writing a little bit at the time. And when I was 18, I even wrote my first finished short story, and I sent it to Présence Africaine. It's an editor in France. And they wrote back. Of course, they didn't publish it because they were not going to publish a book of 15 pages. It would make sense. But they sent me very encouraging letter. But then there was music. So started writing songs, started performing with bands, and I still had this writing thing in the back of my mind, but I was really blindly in love with music, really. That was really what I was doing. And I kind of forgot about it. And it came back to me when I least expected it. I feel like the way I feel about it is the same as with music, with songwriting. I feel like I'm not controlling it. I do not make a conscious decision of sitting down to write. There is something, it has to come out, it has to happen. The way it started with this story was that 3 years ago, I released my third album 1 month before the first lockdown. My timing was terrible, it was the worst. So I released the album, I had all these gigs planned, I was super optimistic, and then everything shut down. And the album is about the memory of the ancestors, the divinities of the water, the mermaids, and all this magical stuff. And so I think it's because I didn't get to go on stage and perform these songs that all these stories, they just stayed with me, and I kept on thinking about it, reading about it, dreaming about it. It was just staying with me. And one night I was about to go to bed, and I had this clear image of this little girl talking to the sea, crying to the sea. And I thought, I don't know what's happening, but I need to write it down. So I thought I was going to write just a couple of lines, but I actually wrote a couple of pages. And then I went back to bed and I thought, what's happening? I don't know. It looks like it's going to be something. So at first I thought maybe it's going to be a kid's story, something, I don't know, 10 pages maybe, some illustration, something. But actually the more I came back to it, the more things were coming. And I was just not able to stop it. I had to finish it.
This might be a nice, before we go on, it might be a nice moment to read. Maybe if you could read some of it and then we can talk maybe more about the story.
We can start from the beginning, from this little girl. And like all the magical stories, it starts with once upon a time. A little girl called Maya was born in a village near the sea. She took her first breath and started crying. She cried when she was cold. She cried when she was hungry, when she needed to be changed, when she was tired. She cried when no one could guess what she needed. She even cried in her sleep. Her mother was so exhausted that one night she stood up and started rocking baby Maya while walking around the house with her eyes still closed. She had been taking care of these night tears for a few months now. With her eyes closed, she opened the door and walked down to the sea. She didn't really know what she was doing. She simply felt called to bring her crying baby to the sea. When she saw the waves and smelled the salt, Maya's mother started crying too. Oh, how she hated the sea. This violent force who took her husband, leaving her alone to deal with a sad baby who would not stop crying. My poor baby must be crying for her father to come back, thought Maya's mother, as she stepped onto the wet sand. Maybe that's him calling me to present his daughter to his new home under the sea. Before she knew what she was doing, her feet started moving faster towards the sea, and she could feel the waves dancing around her ankles, her knees, her thighs, her waist. She was moving her arms up and down to bounce her baby in and out of the water. Each time she brought her back up, she heard an unusual and delightful sound. Laughter. Her baby was laughing. Is that what you needed all along? She asked. All this time what you needed was the sea? All these tears to feel the salty water on your skin? You don't have to cry anymore. All you need is here. They danced in the waves all night until the sun was ready to rise and the first fishermen noticed them on their way to start their day. Aren't you Ida, the wife of our late neighbor? What are you doing here at this time and with your baby? Shouldn't you both be sleeping at home? She didn't say anything. She knew they would not understand. She knew anyone spotted doing anything unusual was in danger of being called crazy, or worse, possessed. She felt that they had already made up their minds regarding her sanity. She was tired and worried they might call somebody else to witness her behavior and comment on what should be done about it. She weakly waved and turned around to walk back to her house. As soon as she was out of the water, her baby started crying again, but this time it was a different cry, a silent one. Tears were rolling down her cheeks and she was smiling. Her eyes were saying, "Thank you, Mama. Thank you."
Oh.
I haven't read all the book yet, but just listening to you read it again, I was struck, like within a page, for me, I was really drawn into something quite magical, and it had that kind of wonder, and I was kind of interested in, you know, when you get this idea to write a book, in my mind it's like, so then you have to be disciplined, get all your ideas, I don't know, and you work on it every day, but from what you're saying, it sounds like that you were taking hold of something and that it was driving it. And there's just something very magical about this relationship between the daughter and the mother. And as that describes, that opening is, she's almost very quickly outcast, and you know, this very mythological kind of situation. She's outcast from the society, and it's just them. Can you just talk more about the idea and where it came from, and how you started to shape that into something that would become a book?
So there was this first night that I told you about when I started writing this first moments and this thing with the sea. And the day after I came back to it and I read what I had written, and when I got to the last sentence, the following one came to me. And so I kept going. Sometimes I'm thinking that there is something that I cannot explain. There's something quite magical about being inspired sometimes. It's like music. I mean, makes me think of, like, on my second album, there is a specific song on it that I wrote maybe half of it, then I went to record, and I just recorded it in one take from the beginning to the end. I don't know where it came from, I don't know how it happened, but it happened. And the way I feel about the book is the same. Every day I was coming back to it, reading, and after reading the last sentence, the following sentence was coming to me. I don't really have an explanation for it, but I feel like this was kind of here during all these years when I was thinking about the water, when I was writing songs about it, and when I was reading books about it. And at some point it just had to come. It had to come out.
Connected to nature, and I was wondering if, so in your culture and in the stories and myths, is there inspirations in that? Because, you know, here there's, you know, the old folklore, and there's, you know, and especially in the communities around the coast, there's all these stories and folklore around the sea, obviously because that was part of their. Is there a similar thing where you're from, and was that an influence, that element of nature, in particular the sea, and this, how important that was?
Yes, it's very important in the culture, but I feel like in Guadeloupe and the Caribbean in general, there was some work done on the mind to forget our traditional ways. So most people would be very westernized, is that a word? And in the way of thinking, or in the way they present themselves to others. But still, deep inside, there is still something that's not forgotten, that the body, the soul has not forgotten. It's like, for example, the difference between religion and spirituality, and the way some people in the Caribbean would just go to church and present themselves as Christian, but still have some things that are definitely from traditional African spirituality that they're still doing, like libations and these kind of things.
Is there a tradition of songs around the sea, or is there music around the sea that, because you've already written about this in your music, in the folklore or in the oral culture?
Well, that's something that I wonder about a lot, because when you compare different islands in the Caribbean, we all have the same history. We all went through the same. Sometimes people say the difference is just a boat stop, We all come from the same place. But then in the tradition, it's different everywhere. And in Guadeloupe, we don't really have so many songs about the sea or about specific divinity. But when you look at Haiti, they are really, really more connected to that, and there you would find many traditional songs about different divinities and the sea and the rivers and the sun and the wind and everything. So it really depends on where exactly.
Maybe it might be time for another reading, but I was just wondering, before maybe you choose the next, you could maybe introduce the next part you're going to read and what the scenario is in the story and at the point of the story.
So there are kind of several stories in the story, because it's the story of several generations of women in the same family, and how each of them have specific story with the sea. So in the first reading, I introduced you to Maya, the baby, and her mother, Ida. And Ida will try to understand the story of the woman of her family, and to do that she has to go back to her mother. And her mother is Leona, so I want to tell you about Leona. Leona hadn't cried in such a long time. It took her a minute to understand why her face was wet. She brushed a tear away and licked her finger to taste the long time lost and oh so familiar salt that she had avoided all these years. She remembered her mother screaming, "Why are you crying so much? Why do you cry all the time? Do you enjoy crying? Is that what's happening here? Did I give birth to a crazy child who enjoys crying?" The truth was that she did. She enjoyed crying. It made her eyes feel good. Her fingers too, when she rubbed her eyes. It made her whole body feel good. Her eyesight had never been great, but as a child, when she cried for a long time, she could see better. Everything was better. She wanted to cry all the time just to feel better. She never had to force it, because when she stopped even for a few minutes, she was missing the salty water so much it hurt. Her mother didn't seem to understand. Nobody did. As soon as she was able to accept that nobody got it and ever would, she taught herself how to cry in silence, how to escape adults and even children's eyes, so she could cry quietly, alone, and feel better for a while. As soon as she could walk, she'd step aside and wait until no one was looking at her to let a few tears get her eyes wet and maybe roll down her cheeks. She shivered and smiled. These quiet crying moments were what she was looking forward to when she was acting all day, pretending to be who everyone wanted her to be, a normal child, a smiling child, a playing and laughing child, She pretended to be all that as long as she could have her quiet time here and there, as long as she could dream about living one day and living a life where she could cry where and when she liked without anyone having any comment to share about it. Hiding behind a tree, she would cry and smile. She got caught many times and got mocked by children her age, interrogated by adults, screamed at by her mother. She was not allowed to cry, she was not allowed to feel better. She should be happy and smile. Smile when her eyes hurt, when her skin was so dry it cracked. She tried for a while to spend more time at the river. The water made her feel okay, but something was missing. It didn't feel as good as tears. She heard about the sea. She heard the sea was salty water, just like tears, and she wondered how good it would feel to bathe in water that felt like tears. She sat at the market, listening to merchants talking about sailing to distant islands on their boats. They talked about the sea that smelled and tasted like salt, and she wondered how it would feel to just dive into the salty water. She asked her mother if women could be sailors too, and Frida laughed. It was so rare to see her laugh. She was beautiful when she did, but on that day, Leona didn't want to marvel at her mother's beauty. She wanted an answer to her question. She wanted a positive answer. She wanted to know that one day, when she grew up, she would be a sailor and friend to the sea. She could hop on a boat, pretending she liked to transport people and merchandise from an island to another, and at night, when everyone would be asleep, jump into the water and feel the salt on her lips. Her mother laughed and called her ridiculous. She told her she should give up these silly dreams, that the sea was not for her. The sea was cursed and would destroy her if she ever went close to it. She said she had made a very conscious decision to stay away from the sea when she came to live in this village far away in the mountain, and it was the best decision of her life.
All right.